There you go.
All right, good evening. It's November 18th, 2020, and we're going to call this Planning Commission to order. Before we get started, I wanted to let the general public know that you can view the meeting through the city's website at www.cityoflaverne.org/stream. If you have any written comments, the email to use would be planning@cityoflaverne.org. Go ahead and move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody can put your right hand on your heart and stand. Ready? Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome everybody back. I hope everybody's feeling healthy. Natalie, if you could call roll.
Commissioner Allison?
Present.
Chair Allred?
Present.
Chair Ward?
Here.
Chairperson Simison?
Present.
Nay? Not present.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to public comment. This is a time set aside for anyone wishing to address the Planning Commission on items not listed in any other place on the agenda. Eric, we were informed there was a submission from the public. Would you like to elaborate?
Just that we did receive one public comment, general public comment, and one comment on the presentation on the Metro L line from Jackson Salinas. Staff is happy to address any questions that the commission might have on those comments. We have not received any other public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you.
What is the nature of the comment on the public comment?
It was regarding the city council's recent decision on a historic house on First Street and White Avenue, and a question about the way that it was processed.
Do we have any questions from any of the commissioners other than Commissioner Allred?
Well, what was the nature of the concern?
So
The way it was processed.
So
That's not really a matter that's before the commission. So,
No, but it's a public comment that was made. I'm just trying to understand the comment.
right. The question was wondering why the decision didn't come to the Planning Commission and the Development Review Committee. As the Planning Commission is aware, the demolition of houses on their own is not a decision that's under the purview of those two bodies. So because of the nature of the specific plan and the language in the specific plan, it did require that the city council basically find that home not non-historic.
Thank you.
All right. Eric, have you received any other additional comments during this period from the public via email?
I do not, or have not.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment and move on to approval of minutes. All right. Take it everybody's reviewed the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 All right. Minutes are approved. Let's go ahead and close approval and move on to other matters of information. Item 2 is a project report from staff. Eric, do you have anything to add?
I will now turn over to Candace for introductions.
Hello, everyone. We just wanted to take some time to update you on the progress that's been made on the Gold Line this year. I'm sure some of you had noticed the closures of Wheeler to relocate the water lines, lay some casing, sewer lines, and utilities. The construction authority and the contractors, which is Hewitt Parsons, are moving forward, and the city continues to work closely with them. We meet with them at least every other week. We also recently reviewed the comments on the supplemental EIR for the proposed modifications that were recently released. We asked Lisa Levy-Bush, the Chief Communications and Strategic Development Officer for the Foothill Gold Line Construction Authority, to be here tonight to give a brief update on what is going on and what we'll expect to see. So here she is.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you virtually. I wish I could be with you in person. Can I share my screen and be able to go through a presentation?
Yes, you should be able to do so.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, here we go. You guys can see it? Awesome. I did a presentation, I think it was last week, and I was just going on and they couldn't see it. So I was like, oh, anyway, so I'm glad you can see it. All right, I will go through it as quickly as possible, and you can stop me and ask questions in between, or it might be easier in this format just to wait till the end. I'm happy to answer any questions. So topics that I want to cover tonight, just give you a quick overview on the Foothill Gold Line, talk about the project in general, talk about specifics of what's going to be happening in the city of La Verne, what's happening, of course, today. Candace just talked a little bit about that. Our community outreach approach before we do major activities in the city. And then I'll go over what's going on with the draft supplemental environmental impact report. So just a quick overview of kind of the project and who we are. The Foothill Gold Line is a part of the County of Los Angeles's, big planning efforts of trying to move people. And as you know, the county is continuing to grow. This slide talks a little bit about that. And the San Gabriel Valley growth is expected at about 11.4% over the next several decades. A lot of that growth, the majority of it is actually happening along the Foothill Gold Line corridor. So over 50% of the job growth is happening along our corridor, and over 40% of the population growth is expected to happen along our corridor. So, this is what we're all used to, of course, maybe not right this minute, but what we were used to before COVID, and will certainly come back again. We studied the corridor, Southern California agencies, and we saw that almost 3 million trips were happening a day through kind of this corridor from Western San Bernardino County through Eastern LA County. And of those trips, only 3% are happening by transit right now. So this is a real need along this corridor that's being filled by this project. The construction authority that I work for is a single purpose agency. We are a state agency. We're not part of LA Metro. We're not a department of LA Metro. We build it and then we turn it over to them to operate. We work very closely with them along with our corridor cities as we design and build the project, but we are a separate agency. This is our board of directors. John Fasana actually is just left our board. And so the Council of Governments tomorrow will be appointing a new member to fill an empty seat on our board, but this was the board as of a couple of days ago. And we're really focused on making sure that we're working closely with our corridor cities. So we have a number of bigger policy committees that work on a monthly basis, a joint powers authority that's made up of elected officials from all of our corridor cities, and then the technical advisory committee, which is made up of staff from all of our cities. And we meet with them very regularly to get their feedback on what's going on the project and use that to make it better. We're building the project in phases, Los Angeles to Pasadena, that opened in 2003. That was what was out there until just a couple of years ago when we finished the next segment of the project from Pasadena to Azusa. And we were fortunate when Measure M passed that we were able to break ground on this next segment from Glendora to Montclair back at the end of 2017. Unfortunately, through the process, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we now know we will likely have to build this in 2 phases because of funding. But the project segment is from Glendora to Montclair. And again, I'll talk about that momentarily. This just shows you where we are within the whole LA County program. Our agency is only responsible for this one line. We are building light rail, all of us out on this last segment of the line. I live Laverne adjacent in Claremont, so I'm a local stakeholder. We all are used to the Metrolink through this corridor or through this area, but light rail is very different. Hopefully you guys maybe have been on the Gold Line. It runs about 22 hours a day, depending on the day of the week. It's smaller vehicles. They hold about 200 passengers per car, goes about 55 miles an hour at its top speed. It's electric powered, so there's overhead catenary lines that power the train. It's a lot more flexible. It's easier to start and stop. And so it allows the system to work very differently than what we're used to. We're all used to the loud horn that has to go on very far away from each of the crossings. That doesn't happen with light rail. So we can talk a little bit about that if you have questions about that. The Glendora to Montclair segment is shown here. It includes 6 stations: Glendora, San Dimas, Laverne, Pomona, Claremont, and Montclair. Right now, and we are funded fully for the first 9.1 miles, which will take us from the Azusa station all the way to the Pomona station. And then we are still looking for funding to complete the segment from Pomona to Montclair. We began work on this project quite a long time ago in 2003 when we finished the first segment from Union Station to Pasadena. And since that time, we've done a lot of planning and engineering work to get to the point where we're under construction today. As I said earlier, we broke ground in December of 2017. Since then, we've completed 2 contracts, mostly utility related contracts. And then in October of last year, we hired Kiewit Parsons Joint Venture. They are the design build team that actually built the first 2 segments of the line and came again on top as we did a competitive bidding process. They were the highest point winner and on their technical side as well as their price. So they were awarded the contract back in October of last year. And unfortunately, through that competitive process, we found out we were hundreds of millions of dollars underfunded to be able to finish the project to Montclair. So right now we're fully funded, like I said, to Pomona. So what I'm going to talk about through the rest of this is really about the project to Pomona. If we are able to find an additional $450 million between now and October of next year, their contract has an option for us to be able to have them build the entire project to Montclair if we're able to find that funding. If that happens, we will complete the whole project altogether, most likely. If it doesn't happen, then we will complete to Pomona and keep looking for the additional funding we need to finish the project to Montclair. Major construction started in July. We spent the first almost year doing design and coordination. And it's a big project, as you can imagine. Thousands and tens of thousands of pages of design go into it. This just gives you a quick overview of the project. Again, it's a little over 9 miles. We have the overhead power system. We share our entire corridor with BNSF Railway. And so their track is currently smack dab in the middle of our 100-foot wide rail corridor. We have to move them within the rail corridor. We will share a corridor, but we will not share track with them. So we are going to be relocating them within the shared corridor before we build the light rail system. We'll have the 4 stations from Glendora to Pomona. Each will have we'll have parking, and we'll talk about that. There will be a place, the Pomona station will be a transfer station between the San Bernardino line of Metrolink and the Gold Line. So that will allow people to transfer at that place and go, either eastbound on the San Bernardino line or westbound on the Gold Line if that is where people need to go. There are a lot of street crossings in this next segment of the line. We crossed 21 streets at street level. We're renovating 19 bridges, and we'll be building what we call traction power supply substations, which is what actually transfers the electrical power to the type of power that the train needs every mile or so. The design builder provided us with this back in February. It's called their baseline schedule. It looks at all of the work that needs to happen over the next 5 years, and it summarizes it into what we can understand is that I was just talking about the freight track shift. That's a really critical time when once that is done, I think we're pretty clear of making sure we'll be able to meet the schedule. That is going to be a tricky thing to be able to relocate the freight track for 9 miles and keep them operational the whole time. So that is one of the important things that Kiewit is needing to do in this project. We also believe that this schedule was a bit aggressive, and we're learning that we were probably right. So this had them finishing up about a year ahead of what the contract required of them. We think they're probably more like 6 months is what I heard today at the board meeting. So this will change a little bit, but in general, this is the order in which things will be happening. So over the next 6 months, just in general, we will be continuing to clear the brush and anything vegetation that's in our right of way. Laverne is coming up very soon. We think we will be finished in Laverne by the end of the year. So in the next few weeks, we believe they'll be able to be out in Laverne starting to clear some of the trees and brush that have been that have grown within the railroad right of way. We are also in the process of completing grade crossing work at a number of crossings outside of Laverne, but Wheeler Avenue is the one in Laverne. It started in October, and we expect it to go through, I think, part of January. I'll get to that in a moment. The design builder will be out there in the mid blocks, sort of between the street crossings, doing a lot of work. And then we expect that they'll start working on bridges at the beginning of next year. So in Laverne, a lot of this is similar to what was in the sort of the big picture overview of the scope. But for Laverne specifically, you see that there are a number of crossings that will be at grade level, meaning that we will have to close those streets for an extended period of time, just like we are at Wheeler, and do a tremendous amount of work underground as well as above ground to upgrade all of those, the streets to all the utilities under the street, as well as the street and curbs and gutters, and put in the safety systems, as well as the track systems. So San Dimas Canyon starts Laverne, obviously Wheeler, A Street, D Street, E Street, White, and Fulton. White Avenue we are going to restripe White Avenue from 6th Street down to the railroad crossing to allow for a second northbound lane, 2 northbound lanes, 1 southbound lane, a bike lane on the southbound lanes. I'm trying to think what else. And and the median in the middle will still be striped so people can make a left, safe holding place for people who have to make left-hand turns. And then at the very eastern part of Laverne at Fulton, there will be some restrictions to the Metrolink parking, getting in and out of the Metrolink parking. The other thing is at I believe all of the streets along Arrow Highway where we are building crossings, we will be also creating right-hand turn pockets on Arrow Highway to hold cars if there is a train coming. So this shows where the station area is in Laverne. On the can you see my arrow? Here's E Street Fairplex on the western side. The platform for the Gold Line will be just to the east of that. You have, I always get so turned around with the Laverne. Here's Arrow Highway here. Okay, and then here's E and Arrow. So here's where we have our environmentally cleared parking area. That's what we are reviewing right now in the environmental analysis. So I'll talk about that momentarily. And you will be able to get to the station through a walking path from White, as well as from E Street. And we are coordinating with the city for the pedestrian bridge over Arrow Highway that the city is working on. This is a rendering of what the station will look like from an artist standpoint. And this is Blue McWright. She is the artist that was selected by the city to produce the artwork, the public artwork at the station. She is using citrus ladders as her theme. They will have the zigzag pattern of water representing water and what's on the MWD building in Laverne. And there'll be 3 of them, one pointing to the Civic Center, one pointing to the Fairplex, and one pointing to downtown, to Old Town Laverne. I said the Fairplex, but I meant the university. I've had a migraine all day, so I should have started with that. My brain is not exactly working as it usually does. This is what Wheeler Avenue is looking like right now, right there at the grade crossing. We're relocating a big water line right there under that crosses under the railroad tracks, and also a sewer line. And like I said, we're going to be installing a new dedicated right-hand turn along Arrow as part of that project. This shows the detour that's in place right now for Wheeler. So it takes cars and anybody actually off either to Bonita and around to San Dimas Canyon or Arrow, depending on which side of the closure you're on. People who live in the neighborhood right there are able to get in, and you're also able to get to Palomares. So all the businesses and Wheeler Park, you're able to get in there as well. So just quickly to go over our community outreach program. So every time we have a closure, we put an outreach plan together specific for that closure or any other major activity. This is an image that came from the Wheeler Avenue grade crossing outreach plan. So what we do is we look at everybody within a certain distance, and you see the little circle around the closure here. That's about a 500-foot radius around there. But then we look, of course, at a broader area, and we identify who the VIPs are that are most impacted. If it's businesses along Palomares, of course, the people who live right at the crossing or businesses right there. The park was a VIP. Any first responders, the trash collectors, anyone who's going to be impacted by the closure gets notified. And we put up the plan together, we show it to the city, make sure we're not missing anything. And then several weeks out before the closure, we start to reach out to those VIPs before we then go out and of course, let the general public know. We go and we do hand deliver notices door to door to folks that are most nearby. We have changeable message board signs that are out on the streets to warn the general public about it. And then we also have signage and available as well. We've recently updated our website with a construction map that is constantly updated and is interactive. So you can actually go on the site and figure out where there's closures or where other activity is happening and be able to click on an icon and get the construction notice for everything that's going on along the corridor. We've also given the city a widget and the chamber and school districts a widget so that on their websites, you can actually see what's going on within their jurisdiction specifically and get to our our map through that as well. And finally, we are in the process of whenever we're, hurting a business, especially like a retail business, we're going out with flags and signage, and then also offering sponsored advertising to help promote their businesses during closures that impact them. So finally, I'm just going to go over the supplemental environmental impact report. A couple of years ago, LA Metro decided to look at their parking policies. And I believe it was the beginning of last year, they actually went to the board with a new policy, which basically when a parking facility gets to a certain level of occupancy, they will start charging for parking. And that was, just a huge change from how they've always maintained their parking. So now along the Gold Line, almost all of the parking facilities are charged for parking. I think they're basically about $3 a day to park in their facilities. When they did that, they also said that they looked into the future in their crystal ball and said, we are building too much parking. People are going to be getting to stations different ways other than driving. And they wanted to spend their money getting people to these stations in other ways as well. So they really would like us to have surface level parking facilities instead of structured parking facilities to allow for changes in the future for that land, better use other than just for parking. And they also thought we were building too many parking spaces. So we took that information and we looked at all of our parking at all of the 5 stations in LA County, which includes Claremont, although it's not part of the design build project at the moment. It is part of the overall project. And we looked at each one and we reevaluated how much parking we think should be included and what could be done for each parking facility. So in Laverne, it actually stayed the same. The location stayed the same and the size of the land stayed the same. But in other cities, either we're proposing to purchase a little bit more land or change the way the land is configured. And in Claremont, we have a couple options that are being looked at, again, to accommodate fewer parking spaces than what we had originally planned. So that's what this matrix shows. It's about half of the parking than overall than what was originally planned. But if you see in Laverne, we had originally planned for 600 parking spaces, and now we're planning for just under 300 parking spaces. And this shows you in Laverne, again, nothing really changed in terms of the location that we were looking at or the size. It fits within the land that we had previously planned to use. And so you can kind of see what this is not a designed configuration. It's just for the EIR showing what we think might happen. We will be hiring another design build team in the future to finalize design and build the parking facilities. So that is not part of the current contract. This is the timeline. We just finished the comment period, the 45-day comment period that was up last Monday, November 9th. And so the team is now taking all those comments and responding to them. And we anticipate that the final supplemental environmental impact report will come out either next month or in January, just depending on how long it takes to get those, to get all the responses completed. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm just going to go one more slide just to let you know, it's really easy to stay updated on the project. If you're not on our email list, we don't send out a ton of stuff, but we really do let people know when a major thing is happening, especially now with construction underway. So if you're not already on our database, I encourage you to get added. And these are other ways on Facebook and Twitter and our blog that you can stay updated.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the presentation, especially in light of your migraine.
I know, I'm sorry. I was realizing I was saying a million times and I'm like, oh.
You sounded great. That was a good presentation.
Thank you.
Well, I guess we don't really have to open up the floor, right, for comment, but let's do it anyways. Is there any commissioners that would like to ask Lisa any questions regarding the presentation?
Yeah, Lisa, I just want to know how I would go about getting registered for the updates.
You can either just go to foothillgoldline.org and right on our homepage, you can just type your email address in, or you can send me an email and I can do it for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jason, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Yeah, good presentation. Sorry about your headache.
Thank you.
Jeff, do you have any questions for Lisa?
Well, I think you answered my questions, Lisa. So the parking, surface parking will be the same footprint as basically what the parking structure would have been, but it's 299 spaces as opposed to 600.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And so I was
go
just going to say, we are working with the city. We hired a transportation firm to help all of our cities look at parking around the future stations and how to protect them from Metro riders just kind of using parking. I think Laverne is actually pretty good because you've got already time sensitive parking around the station and or private parking like at the Fairplex and at the university. That's very well looked after. But a number of our other stations have a lot of free street parking around there. So we're working with all of our cities just to get everybody ready and to have a toolkit if there are problems once the train comes.
And you mentioned the bridge across spanning Arrow Highway to the Fairplex is still in the plan. What is the purpose of that bridge? I mean, to serve people that might be parking also at Fairplex, or?
I could answer that, Lisa.
Okay.
It is a city project. It's not related directly to the Gold Line project, but the Old Town Laverne specific plan identified, that a pedestrian bridges in this area could be beneficial, and primarily it's to provide direct pedestrian access from the station platform and in the Gold Line area across Arrow Highway and across the Metrolink tracks directly to the Fairplex for all of their events, from the LA County Fair to the drag races to the other hundreds of events. And the Fairplex is working on internal transportation models or methods to get people from that north end of the campus down to the heart of the fairgrounds. And so this will be the direct connection instead of crossing at the street level at Arrow Highway and across the Metrolink tracks, which will also be heavily used at that time to provide a safe access to connect to the Fairplex and their future development there as well. Not just at this time, there's no plan to utilize the fairgrounds for Gold Line parking.
Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
Lisa, I have a question in regards to Wheeler. You guys are, as you said, pushing active transportation in lieu of automobile transportation, which is one of the reasons for going with parking lots versus structures. Along Wheeler, are you guys going to be, well, as part of active transportation, let me start it off. There's a bike path that runs down Wheeler and it stops at Palomares and turns into kind of a dirt and glass littered area where people trying to get down to Puddingstone, let's say, get stuck in. Is there plans for extension of that bike path across Wheeler in this phase of the construction or any phase?
Not in our project. Eric, I don't know if
Yeah, I could talk to that as well. So technically the bike path today drops down to the county flood control channel and goes underneath Arrow Highway technically, but you're right, there's a gap from where the paved class 1 bike lane is, which I think it ends at 3rd Street or right around there, maybe at 2nd Street, where it just becomes dirt. I've talked to Public Works. They do have a plan to make that connection to the flood control access, but where Wheeler is at the flood control, there's not the width there to have a street level bike lane, unfortunately. that would cross Arrow Highway. We do have a class 1 on White Ave or Wheeler Avenue south of Arrow Highway, but that pinch point where the flood control channel is just north of the railroad right of way is too narrow to fit it there. So that's why it hasn't been established before. So I know Public Works has looked at that, but not directly related to the GO line itself.
Too bad. It seems like a missed opportunity with that much construction going in that immediate area, that something couldn't be engineered, but understood. Appreciate it, Eric. And access to Palomares is still open, correct, from Wheeler by
It
the
is.
softball fields?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any
you.
other questions? No?
I'm happy to come back anytime. So just let me know. We can keep you updated as we know more about schedule stuff. I'm happy to come back.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Lisa.
Stay safe. Happy Thanksgiving next week.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close, I guess, other item number 2 and move on to item number 3 on other matters, which is the housing element update. And Maya and Candace are going to be presenting this. Eric, do you have anything to add?
I don't. I think Maya's has a PowerPoint presentation for you as well on this one.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson and Commissioners. So today I am going to provide an overview of the housing element update process and the regional housing needs assessment. Some of you may recall about 2 years ago, staff did provide kind of an overview on the same topic, really more geared towards the regional housing needs assessment. So since we have some new commissioners and it has been a couple years and we're kind of embarking on this current housing element update process, I just wanted to provide an overview of what these things are, what it means for the city, and kind of what the next steps are. So I really want to kind of start with just creating a big picture understanding of where regional housing needs assessment and housing element exist kind of in the world of planning and in state housing law. So for that, I wanted to start with the general plan. The general plan is a state mandated long-term policy document, also referred to as a blueprint, basically for communities' vision of their future growth. The general plan consists of different elements that are each based on specific topic areas. I've listed the elements here that are in the city's forthcoming general plan update. There are 7 mandatory elements. Some of those have been combined in our general plan update that's ongoing. And the general plan update occurs generally every 10 to 20 years. One of those mandatory elements in the general plan is the housing element. So what is housing element? Housing element is essentially a plan to address the housing needs of everyone in the community. A very condensed way of thinking of the components of this housing element plan can kind of be summed up by these 3 bullet points. So it identifies local housing needs. It's about adopting programs to meet those housing needs. And then it's also about identifying adequate sites for all types of housing to accommodate everyone in the community. So the housing element update occurs every 4, 5, or 8 years. The timing in terms of when the housing element gets updated, it's predetermined kind of by these cycles. So I just mentioned that we have the general plan, and the general plan update gets updated every 10 to 20 years. That's a long-term policy document. But the housing element kind of needs to be updated on an ongoing basis in a much shorter time frame, more frequently, I should say, than the general plan. The reason why the housing element gets updated more frequently than you would a general plan is because the state's housing goals are constantly evolving, and the state needs to ensure that cities are doing their part to kind of proactively reach those housing goals. And they do that by making sure that every city is kind of doing their part. So That's why you have periodic updates to the housing element every 4, 5, or 8 years. Like I said, it depends. It's different for different jurisdictions. For our city, our housing element update occurs every 8 years. And the state basically ensures that progress is being made towards achieving these housing goals by having the housing element submitted on those cycles or periods of time every 4 to 5, 8 years. And then they review and certify them. And then they also require kind of annual progress reports to see how cities are faring in terms of meeting those housing goals. So we know that the housing element is focused on planning for a community's housing needs, but the next question is, how do you know how much housing you need to plan for in your housing element? And so that's where RHNA comes in. RHNA stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and that's really where the housing element process starts from. RHNA, or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, essentially quantifies the projected need for housing in an area based on what's anticipated to be the growth of a region. So there are 27 regions in the state, and the Housing and Community Development Department, or HCD, they essentially assign those regions, which are represented by councils of governments or metropolitan planning organizations, what their expected growth is over a specific period of time, which is the projection period or the cycle. And then based on what they anticipate the growth to be, they determine how much housing they need to provide to accommodate that growth. So on the right, you can see is a figure of California percentage-wise showing where growth is expected in the region through 2025. I mean, you can see in the Southern California area, that's where a majority of the state's growth is going to occur. So HCD assigns each region basically a RHNA figure of their projected housing need. And that RHNA figure is broken down into varying income brackets. So if a region needs to provide X amount of housing, it can't all be housing in that only caters to one income group. It needs to cater to a variety of different income groups. And so they specify how much housing needs to be provided for those different housing income level groups. I've indicated below or on the slide, the 4 income groups that they basically count are very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. So once a region has been assigned a regional housing need assessment, which is their projected housing need for their overall region, that region then needs to allocate or distribute that number to all of the jurisdictions that are within their area. So that's what the RHNA allocation is. It's the process of distributing the overall RHNA number to local governments. HCD does require those regional governments to develop a methodology for allocation. So it can't be kind of, willy-nilly just assigning this city X amount and this, another city X amount. It has to be very methodical in how it is they determine how and why a city has to provide the projected number of housing units for their area. The goal of the methodology of creating a methodology and having this methodical process for the allocation is to ensure that regional housing growth is distributed equitably. So it's not all being kind of centered in one locality, that it's spread fairly throughout the region. And so that's why you might hear a fair share. It's this idea that every local government in a region needs to accommodate their own fair share of the overall regional housing need. And so the housing element is how local governments demonstrate their ability to meet their RHNA allocation. So going back to kind of the beginning, the housing element, again, is a plan for how a local government can meet the housing needs of their community. And the housing needs are determined through that RHNA figure that's assigned to the regional government, and then through the RHNA allocation that the regional government then assigns to the local government. One thing that I need to make crystal clear is that the housing element is intended to demonstrate that there's potential for the assigned RHNA allocation or projected housing need to be built, but there's no requirement that the local government or the regional government, for that matter, actually build the projected housing need. Obviously, that's the goal, is we want to see that housing built, but the housing element is strictly for the purposes of demonstrating that policies, programs, and practices are in place in each city that would allow the potential development of that housing. So this kind of illustrates, again, talking about the big picture, what the process is, and where RHNA and housing element updates kind of fit into the grand scheme of things. So like I said, you have the Housing and Community Development Department at the state level. They project the future growth for the various regions in the state, and they assign each region a RHNA figure. From there, the regional government, which could be your council of government or your metropolitan planning organization, they develop a methodology to allocate their RHNA number to all the local jurisdictions in their area. And then they assign each local jurisdiction a RHNA allocation. Then it's up to the local government, once they receive their RHNA allocation, to update their housing element and demonstrate their ability to meet that projected housing need. And then lastly, they submit their housing element update to the Housing and Community Development Department for review and certification, just so HCD and the state can verify that every city is on track and doing their part to meet the projected housing need for the region and the state as a whole. So now that we've kind of established the basic understanding of the purpose of RHNA and housing element updates, we can kind of bring it down to a level that's more regional and local in nature. So the regional planning organization or regional governmental organization that kind of oversees La Verne is the Southern California Association of Governments, also known as SCAG. SCAG is the nation's largest metropolitan planning organization. It covers 19 million residents, 6 counties, and 191 cities, including La Verne. So as I stated before, the regional housing needs assessment, it's for a projection period, right? The projection period can range. It can be the 4 years, the 5 years, or the 8 years. But each new period starts a new cycle. So currently, SCAG is in the 6th cycle of RHNA, which for the SCAG region is an 8-year planning period that's between 2021 to 2029. We've seen in the 6th cycle of RHNA a significant increase in the projected housing need from what's previously been projected in the 4th and the 5th cycle of RHNA. And this has been seen across the board, but the increase is quite stark and significant, as I'll show you in these next few slides. There are a number of reasons for the increase between the 4th cycle, 5th cycle, and 6th cycle. But one of the main reasons that HCD noted in why there was such a significant increase was that the 5th cycle, which would have been between 2014 to 2021, was impacted by the recession and thus was significantly lower than the 4th cycle, which would have been 2008 to 2014. Also, they've updated the ways that they kind of formulate and determine what the RHNA number is. So due to the amount of housing that's required to overcorrect kind of pre-existing overcrowding and overpayment of existing households that you would find in the SCAG region, they've had to kind of increase the overall projected housing need for SCAG. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate the significant increase that I was talking about. So for the 5th cycle, which again would have been 2014 to 2021, or the cycle that we're currently in, the overall housing need for SCAG was 412,137 housing units. The 6th cycle, which is coming up and will be between 2021 to 2029, the housing element update that we'll be planning for, the overall RHNA figure for SCAG is 1.3 million. So it's a huge increase in the overall housing that our region needs to provide. And that gets passed down to local governments, including La Verne. So another comparison, in the 5th cycle for the city of La Verne, our overall RHNA allocation was 562 units. It's anticipated that for the 6th cycle, what we're currently planning for, our overall housing allocation will be 1,343 units. So more than double what we previously had. And this is just to kind of illustrate I think the the challenge that we'll be facing with the sixth cycle. So as previously noted, in the fifth cycle, our RENA allocation was 562 units. And so right now we're 5 years, well, almost 6 years into that cycle. We haven't yet tallied the numbers for 2020, but we're basically 6 years into the fifth cycle, and thus far we've only produced 205 units and still have 357 remaining to fulfill that 562 RENA allocation. Again, I'll reiterate that the RENA allocation that we're provided, we're not required to build those units. We just need to illustrate through our housing element that there's the potential for those to be developed. But obviously the goal of the state is to produce as much housing as possible. So we are lacking in that sense, in that, this in the state's view and, in SCAG's view, we should be producing 562 units between 2014 to 2021. And it's, the end of 2020, and we still have 357 more units to go. So that's just to kind of illustrate the challenge that we'll be facing in trying to fulfill the 1,300 housing unit allocation that we've been provided for the sixth cycle. So this just demonstrates again kind of what SCAG's overall RENA figure is for the sixth cycle, and then what our allocation is for the city of La Verne as part of the sixth cycle. And this just shows kind of the income limits. So that way, so you'll notice in the previous slides that it tells you how many housing units you need to provide for the various income levels, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And those are all relative to the kind of average medium income. And so this shows you what in 2020 the average medium income is in Los Angeles County. The median income for a one-person household is $54,000, and it goes up to $77,000 for 4 people. And then, the various income levels, whether it's extremely low, very low, low, or moderate, are all relative to that base median income level. So kind of with that explanation, you can kind of see that, for the sixth cycle of RENA, the city is expected to provide, 413 housing units that are very low, which is less than 50% of AMI. So that's just to give you some sense on kind of the price points of the housing that we're anticipated or expected to provide in the community. So, what's next? Well, I'll go back really quickly. So this technically right now is the draft allocation that La Verne has been provided, the 1,343 units. We were provided that draft allocation in September. There was an appeal process. The city did not appeal our numbers. So technically they're not finalized yet. They'll become final in February of 2021. But we don't really anticipate any changes to what our allocation would be. So knowing that, we need to start planning for our housing element update based on the allocation that we have, which kind of brings me to the next slide. So, what are the next steps now that we know what our allocation is? We put out an RFP in July for a housing element consultant to help us prepare the housing element. We ended up selecting De Novo Planning Group. They're currently contracted to prepare the general plan update. And so they'll be adding this to their scope of work. And it's really been kind of like a great fit just because of their past experience working with the city and their familiarity with the general plan and other documents. It really allowed them to kind of hit the ground running quickly and kind of work efficiently and effectively to prepare this housing element update. So we had the kickoff meeting in October, and the work is currently underway. This is a very condensed version of what the housing element kind of consists of, but if I had to break it down, De Novo will be reviewing and evaluating our current housing element, which is for 2014 to 2021, as well as our current general plan and the draft general plan update that is in the process of being adopted. They'll review all of those to determine how they kind of how the policies and goals and strategies of those documents kind of align with what we need to do moving forward to meet our draft RENA allocation number. The housing element update will also include technical studies again, this is a condensed version. There are a lot of kind of state mandated requirements of what housing element needs to include. But, you know, to sum it up, it's an evaluation and study of the housing needs of the community, you know, the existing housing inventory, a site inventory analysis to determine, you know, what sites could potentially provide more housing, and then a constraints analysis. So, you know, what are the issues that are preventing housing from being developed? And another important component of the housing element update process is the public participation and community engagement that it requires. So we will be having, or De Novo will be conducting stakeholder interviews to kind of get feedback and input from the community on, you know, what they see as being the city's housing priorities. And similarly, we'll also be conducting virtual workshops. And so all of this needs to occur kind of within the next 11 months because the housing element needs to be submitted and certified by the Housing and Community Development Department by October 15th, 2021. So we'll obviously, you know, keep everyone involved, the Planning Commission, City Council, and community members. And, you know, eventually we will provide a draft housing element update for them to review and provide comments and feedback on. But the current timeline and expectation is that we would have the final housing element update ready for adoption at public hearings before Planning Commission and then ultimately City Council kind of by September 2021. So that way we can comfortably meet that October 15th, 2021 deadline. Now, because you know, I did talk a little bit about the challenges with this housing element update, just looking at our RHNA allocation and kind of the increase that we've seen between the 5th cycle and the 6th cycle. So that's something that will be a really important part of this update is kind of evaluating our land use map and our zoning map and kind of determining, you know, strategically how we can accommodate that growth that we need to kind of fulfill the housing need for in our local area. Already we've kind of been looking at the Old Town La Vergne specific plan, which we kind of relied on heavily for the previous housing element update to fulfill our RHNA allocation. But also some other strategies that we'll be using are, you know, counting accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units, which are kind of growing more and more in popularity towards meeting that RHNA allocation. So just a reminder, we are going to have virtual workshops. The current plan is to have 2 different virtual workshops. The first one will be launching on Monday, November 30th, and it'll be available through Thursday, December 17th. It's going to be made available on the same website where we have all of the information on the general plan update, so laverne.generalplan.org. And then if Planning Commission has any questions, I'm happy to answer any of those for you. Thank you.
Maya, thank you very much. Appreciate the update. Let's go and open up for any questions from any of the commissioners. Jeff, do you have any questions regarding the presentation?
A great presentation, Maya. You mentioned that the staff is looking preliminarily at maybe the Old Town specific plan area and then also ADUs, right? To find places to for low and moderate housing. Is that correct?
Not necessarily for low and moderate housing, but just to kind of, you know, 1,300 housing units. That's a big number to fill in a city that's more or less already built out, right? So we're going to be looking towards the Old Town La Vergne specific plan, which does allow for kind of higher density and a lot of new residential opportunities, as well as the accessory dwelling units to meet the housing allocations, not just for necessarily the very low, or moderate, but in any of the income categories, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Jason, do you have any questions?
No, I mean, I'm just curious, have we ever hit our, I mean, what happens if we don't get our allocated, you know, build out in the years that they give us? I mean, have we ever been able to do that?
I don't believe so. Eric or Candace might be able to answer that,
No,
but
Yeah, no, most cities are unable to meet the actual units built, but as Maya stated earlier, our job is to plan for and to allow for those units to be built, not necessarily to see the construction of them. That's on the private market to determine, right? So when the housing element's approved and adopted, it means that we've got the land uses in place, and the zoning in place, and the policies in place to allow that number of units to be built if the market dictates it. So, but most cities, especially in Southern California, it's really because of the land value and the construction cost, it's almost impossible to see, any city meeting their numbers.
I mean, when you're approving land to be built out, is it a ratio based, like, from low income to moderate to above, I mean, or is it just like, hey, we got 400 in this category and there's 400 being proposed, let's do it. But or is it more like 400 can't be built because we haven't built any in A, B, and C? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand the question, and I would say, like around the Gold Line station, we require 15% of those units to be affordable, to be, moderate or below. And of those units, 40% of those units are required to be very low. So if you're going to build 100 houses down in the Old Town by the Gold Line, 15 of those have to be, or let's say 8 have to be moderate and 7 have to be very low. So we have very specific percentages down there. But somebody could come by and propose a 100% low income affordable project where all units are that way, because there's different tax breaks and other financial incentives to be building affordable housing in California. So a developer might come and want to build a 100% affordable project, in which case it would fulfill all those needs. So again, we don't really get to dictate that as much as allow for those kind of flexibilities in the percentages and what type of housing project is being built.
And what happens if it falls outside of the allocated goal that we're trying to hit? What if someone proposes to build more affordable housing? Then we say no?
No, I mean, obviously any housing project still, has to go through a review of the city, and sometimes has to be approved by the planning commission, sometimes has to be approved by the city council. And so if it doesn't fit in the right neighborhood, there's probably going to be objections and not a lot of support for it if it's more than what we feel is required. But our zoning typically has a maximum density in the different zones, to where you can't build more than this number of units on a property throughout the city. It varies, right, from 5-acre lots to 60 units on an acre.
Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, thank you. This is all new to me, so I appreciate it, Maya. Thank you. Good presentation. Thank you for the explanation too. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thomas, do you have any questions for Maya or Eric?
Yeah, I have a couple. First, with the RHNA allocation, is land availability something that's taken into consideration when they are coming up with their allocation?
Right. So I didn't get into it. There's a lot more information that I could have provided, but the actual kind of RHNA, the sixth cycle of RHNA kind of kicked off in December 2017. So when that starts, HCD, they work with the Department of Finance to look at demographic information to determine, what's the projected growth for a region. They come up with a kind of initial RHNA figure for each region, including SCAG. And then they kind of go back and forth with SCAG. SCAG then provides their information, and SCAG relies on cities. So back in 2018, when we last provided an update to Planning Commission, it was because at the time staff was working with SCAG to kind of evaluate meticulously, like, these are the sites we have available in Laverne. So this is theoretically how much housing we could provide here. And SCAG takes all of that information into consideration when they're kind of negotiating, I guess, what their RHNA figure should be for the region. And then likewise, once they are assigned a RHNA figure that, is set in stone, the 1.3 million for the SCAG region, they still have to develop that methodology for the allocation. And so again, that requires more kind of back and forth with the individual jurisdictions to kind of go over, this is the available land we have. In Laverne, we have a lot of hillside areas where the slope simply wouldn't permit for housing development. And so it's making sure that those types of considerations are taken in by the SCAG as they determine ultimately what our allocation would be. So the short answer is yes, there's a process to kind of make sure that all of these various factors are being considered when ultimately we're determining what the RHNA figure is and what the RHNA allocation is.
Great, thank you. My second question is Old Town and the alternative dwelling units, are those the only avenues of recourse that we have as far as space availability?
Well, so we also have, the Foothill Boulevard specific plan. So there are different areas within the city that could likely accommodate additional kind of growth and development. So that's what the process of the housing element update will be. I just named those two kind of as the obvious ones that we would look to, because the Old Town Laverne specific plan was only adopted 7 years ago, and we really haven't seen that much development there yet. Thus far, we've only had one actual development come to fruition, so there's a lot more potential for development there. And then obviously accessory dwelling units are very popular, and staff gets lots of inquiries about them, and we've processed many applications for them. But the housing element update process will look kind of holistically at the city through a very meticulous site inventory analysis and kind of existing housing analysis to determine where there is kind of a push and pull and where we might be able to accommodate additional growth.
Great. Thank you very much for your time and presentation.
Maya, I have a question. Do you think that, or do you anticipate rezoning areas of Laverne to accommodate this and make that plan available so people can access higher densities, or is that
Yeah, I mean, based on kind of the significant increase to our RHNA allocation between 5th cycle and 6th cycle, that's something that we have been preparing for. So that was kind of added in as an optional task to the scope of work that we hired De Novo to do. So they will be preparing the housing element update. And then based on the findings and the results and analysis of our housing element update, if we find that, there's simply no way to accommodate all this growth that we have to show for without doing some rezonings here and there, we've brought them on so that way they can also kind of help us do that zoning update. It's not, that's just one of many options on the table. So it's not a foregone conclusion, but it's something that we're anticipating. And obviously, if it came to that, the community and planning commission and city council, they would all be involved in that process.
okay? Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Any other comments from staff? Well, thank you very much, Maya. I appreciate your presentation, and going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting. And the next regular meeting is going to be on December 9th. Is that correct, Eric? December 9th?
That's correct. And we do have items for that agenda.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Look forward to seeing you all. Have a happy holiday.
Good night, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.